The Queen Who Rode with the Dead Part 3. Chapter 17, The Ghost of Berkeley. They buried the king in silence. No public mourning. No cathedral tolls. The tomb was sealed with mortar and shame. They called it mercy. But nothing done to Edward II was ever merciful. And the earth, it remembered. The sightings began at Berkeley Castle. First, just the guards. A flash in the corner of the eye. A cold spot near the cell. A shape standing in the hall where no torch would stay lit. They said it looked like a man, tall, robed, crownless. But his skin peeled back at the jaw. And his mouth hung open, always open, too wide. As if screaming. But no sound came out. Not at first. Then came the monk. Brother Adric. Sent from Canterbury to bless the castle after rumors of unrest. He stayed one night. He never finished the second. That evening, he entered the lower hall with a censer and a psalm. He never made it past the first verse. The smoke turned black. His fingers blistered on the rosary. And the iron door of the king's old cell, sealed for months, creaked open of its own accord. Adric didn't step inside. But something stepped out. He ran from the chamber screaming. They found him in the chapel, raving, face scratched raw, blood in his eyes, kneeling in front of the crucifix and whispering. He walks. He walks. He walks with the jaw of the damned. When they asked what he meant, he could only say. He screams, but it's not his scream. It's hers. The Queen was told the next morning. She was combing her hair in silence. She paused. She looked in the mirror, the one she no longer trusted, and said. The bones weren't enough. He kept something behind. The haunting spread. At first it was only Berkeley. Then, Gloucester. Then whispers in Westminster itself. Servants reported cold drafts in locked rooms. The sound of pacing feet, always barefoot, always wet. And that open-mouthed shadow appearing for just a second, always facing the throne. One night, a page opened a cabinet and found all the dishes arranged in a spiral, soaked in bile, etched with teeth marks. His hair turned white before sunrise. And the screaming. It came next. Not always audible. Sometimes only felt, like pressure behind the eyes. A scream that rang in the bones, in the dreams, in the chapel walls. But sometimes, it burst forth. One guard dropped to his knees in the middle of watch and began to claw at his own mouth, sobbing. It's his scream but her breath. It's not echo. It's inheritance. He died with his jaw unhinged, neck snapped backwards, as if pulled from inside. Mortimer grew restless. He began to carry charms. Salt. Iron. Prayers stitched into his cuffs. He demanded Edward's tomb be reopened, burned, scattered. The Queen refused. Ashes can still scream, she said. And some doors, once opened, can only be fed. That night, she walked alone to the western corridor. Where the air never stirred. Where servants never lingered. She found the reflection again, her own, but not hers. It was humming. Mouth closed. Eyes bleeding gently. In its palm, a tooth. She took it. Elsewhere, the monk Adric wrote one final phrase before tearing out his own tongue with a candle hook. The king is dead. But the voice remains. And the jaw will not close until the last of her bloodline is swallowed. Chapter 18, The Dream of Melusine. It began with breath. Not her own. A slow exhale beside her cheek. Damp. Heavy. Carrying the scent of iron, ash, and brine-soaked hair. She turned in her sleep, expecting Mortimer. What she found was not a man. She was no longer in her bed. Or perhaps she was, but the world around it had changed. The chamber was submerged. Not in water, but in weightless dark. The walls pulsed. The tapestries bled salt. The ceiling swirled like the belly of a deep-sea beast, slow, full of teeth. And at the foot of her bed stood her Melusine. Not an image. Not a dream. A presence. Tall, pale, nude but ageless. Her torso gleamed like salted ivory, her eyes were hollow, but glittering with stars. Where her legs should have been, was a serpent's tail, coiled in loops of glistening scale and half-digested crowns. It moved without noise, curling up the bed frame, winding between Isabella's legs like steam, like memory. The queen could not move. Melusine did not speak at first. She hummed a lullaby. One Isabella had heard before, but never from lips. Only from blood. When Melusine finally leaned in, she did not kiss. She breathed into Isabella's mouth. The queen tasted milk gone sour, dirt freshly dug, honey spoiled in sunlight, her own afterbirth. Then the voice came. You called me. You wore the thorn. You drank from the mirror. You buried your love beneath a silver coin. And now? She coiled tighter, resting against Isabella's belly. Your womb has borne my vengeance. The queen screamed, but made no sound. Melusine placed a finger on her lips. It was cold. And wet. And smelled like her mother's grave. He is not yours anymore. The boy you named Edward is mine. I wrapped his heart in moss. I lined his veins with smoke. I whispered into his bones while he slept inside you. You were the vessel. But I was the womb. The serpent tail tightened. The bed cracked. The wood wept sap. And then Melusine opened her mouth wide, too wide, and from it poured ashes. Coins. Stillborn children's teeth. A rose with petals made of skin. She pressed them all against Isabella's chest and whispered. This is your legacy. A kingdom that howls. A bloodline that gnaws itself to sleep. Then she was gone. And Isabella was left in her bed. Drenched. Shaking. And clutching something in her hand. A single scale. Larger than her palm. Still warm. When she placed it in her drawer, it hissed softly and curled like a sleeping child. That day, Edward III awoke with black veins across his ribcage. He said nothing. But he began to hum the lullaby. No one had taught it to him. Isabella stared into the mirror that morning. Her reflection blinked in rhythm with her own. But it was smiling. And its stomach was swollen. Chapter 19, The Toll of Bone. The rot did not begin in the flesh. It began in the fields. The barley yellowed early. The wheat curled in the sun like old paper. Roots blackened underground. Fruit trees bloomed, then bled. In the east, a farmer's orchard turned to stone overnight, apples hard as skulls, leaves stiff like parchment. When a child bit one, it shattered her teeth. Then the rivers choked. First with silt. Then with birds. Thousands of them. Not killed. Drowned. Eyes open. Wings snapped backward. Beaks stuffed with nettles. They floated in the Thames, bloated, twisted, their feathers matted with algae and milk. Fishermen wept. The water turned sweet, then sour. And then it bubbled. Children vanished. One by one. Always at dusk. Always near water. Always with the faint smell of wax in the air. Their shoes were found placed carefully beside ponds and wells. Their names echoed for days, whispered from tree hollows and empty cradles. One mother followed her son's voice into the woods and returned with white eyes, holding a doll made of hair and ash. She never spoke again. The priest said nothing. Until one broke. Father Ealdric of Lichfield stood before his flock and screamed. She has opened the underworld. She's not our queen. She's the keyhole. Every breath she takes is a door. And something is coming through. He was dragged from the altar, naked and bleeding. His tongue fell out before they reached the door. Mortimer grew afraid. He spoke in hurried whispers to foreign envoys. He sent letters sealed in iron. He told Isabella, "We must stop. The people are dying." She looked at him. "I didn't ask for their breath. I only asked for a future." She turned and walked into her garden. Behind her, the grass withered. In the countryside, cows began to birth stillborn calves with human fingers. Goats screamed with women's voices. Bread rose with blood inside. Every well bore the same mark scratched in its stone rim. A spiral, made of teeth. The court tried to deny it. Until the king himself, Edward III, fell ill. Not with fever. With visions. He stood in the council chamber and announced, "I am not my own." He tore open his doublet, revealing ribs sharp beneath skin like wet parchment. Then he pointed to the queen and said, "She sleeps with the door open. And what walks in her dreams now walks in mine." He collapsed. The throne room floor cracked beneath him, not from weight, but from refusal. The queen stood still. And smiled. A bishop tried to have her exorcised. He was found the next day kneeling in the nave of St. Albans, his spine bent backward, jaw unhinged, muttering, "Bone. Bone. Toll of bone." She paid nothing. We pay everything. His heart had turned to salt. The sky turned grey for a week. Not with clouds, with ash. But no fires burned. When it rained hair, long, black strands that clung to roofs and wrists. Some people ate it in madness. Some burned it and screamed at the smell. The queen continued to walk her gardens. Barefoot. Humming. Pregnant with silence. And wherever she stepped, the earth sagged. Not collapsed. Sagged, as if something beneath was breathing, and beginning to stir. Chapter 20, The Boy Who Would Be King. He had worn the crown for 2 years. But only now did he begin to understand what it meant. Edward III was no longer a boy. But neither was he a man. He was something caught in between. A prince raised in whispers, a king surrounded by rot, a son born of silence and dreams too old for language. And now, he began to watch his mother. He saw her speaking to the shadows. At first, he thought she was praying. Muttering softly in the chapel gardens, fingers laced, lips still. But there was no Latin. No scripture. Only names. Old names. Names he had never read in books, names like Igan, Lamin, Velith, Melusine. And once, his own name, said twice, once in a whisper, once in a sigh. He followed her one night. Past the hedges. Past the black pond. To the old shrine where the stone had cracked from within. She stood in the center. Alone. But not alone. He could see shapes gathering. Not clearly. Not fully. Just the impression of faces in the dark, suspended in branches, mist, fire. And one of them stepped forward. A tall woman. Pale as candle ash. Hair floating like seaweed in a current he could not feel. She looked directly at him. And smiled. "There you are, grandson." He did not sleep for 3 nights. When he did, he dreamed of a mouth, huge, wet, and unseen, whispering. "You were born in a borrowed womb. What was poured into her now overflows in you." He woke bleeding from his nose. The doctors said it was strain. But the blood ran in spirals on the pillow. The queen grew more radiant each day. She glowed. Glided. Her voice softened into lullabies that stuck in the walls. But to Edward, she looked hollowed, not weak, but deep, as though her ribs no longer held organs but wind and root. Her eyes never blinked when he entered a room. And when she smiled, he felt the air go thin. He began to avoid her. He stopped eating at her table. He stopped walking near her garden. He refused the wine she poured. But the court noticed. And rumors began. The boy fears his mother. He dreams of drowning in her womb. He hears her voice in the marrow of his bones. They were not wrong. One night, he confronted her. Not in anger. In terror. Who do you speak to? She tilted her head. To our kin. To those who remember what we were, before kings, before thrones. When we ruled not by sword, but by song. You are their seed. He stepped back. She reached out, not to strike. To touch his face. You are not meant to wear the crown. You are meant to become it. He fled her chamber. He vomited salt. The next morning, his hair began to fall out in thin, wet clumps. Servants said he'd been cursed. He said nothing. But he ordered all mirrors in his wing removed. The same night, he heard singing. Not from the halls. From beneath the floor. Low, old, and female. It hummed a lullaby in a tongue no one knew. Except him. He had never learned the words. But he sang along. Chapter 21, The Serpent's Feast. It was not called a trial. But that is what it was. They dragged Mortimer to the scaffold in a torn shirt and chains that had been blessed 5 times and still smoked against his skin. No one dared speak his name in full. They called him traitor. They called him sorcerer. They called him the Queen's shadow. He did not resist. But he looked for her. Just once. She was there. Standing beside her son, Edward III, who sat rigid as stone on the raised dais. The boy said nothing. The Queen smiled. The crowd was silent. No jeers. No cries. Only the wind moving through the square like the breath of something watching. Above them, blackbirds circled, but never landed. Below them, the ground had cracked into a spiral during the night. No one mentioned it. The priest read the charges. Treason. Usurpation. Black council. But his voice faltered at the last count. And, consorting with forces, unnatural. The scroll in his hands curled inward, burned at the edges, and turned to ash before the final word was read. Mortimer met Isabella's eyes. She did not look away. His lips moved once. You promised. She touched her hand to her belly. And smiled. The blade was hot. Not from fire, but from something beneath the earth. It hissed as it touched his neck. And when it struck, it made no sound. Only a rush of air, a gasp, not from lungs, but from the throat of something buried. His head fell. The ground quaked. And every rose in the Queen's garden withered at once. She did not blink. She did not flinch. She did not turn away. And in her ear, though no one else heard, a voice called like perfume in the dark. Now you are mine alone. That night, Isabella walked the halls barefoot. The stone floor steamed under her steps. The torches dimmed. And the guards wept without knowing why. In the throne room, she knelt, not before her son. Before the empty space behind the throne. She placed her hand on the stone. It pulsed. And a whisper answered. You have no king. You have no man. You are the gate now. Let me in. She said. I already did. Across the sea, a child was born with gills. In the north, a bishop's corpse was found coiled like a snake. And in London, the cathedral bells rang at midnight, though no hand pulled their ropes. They rang 13 times. The Queen did not attend Mass that week. But a serpent was seen coiled on the altar. And it was humming. Chapter 22, The Weeping Icon. It began in Ely, where the fenland mists cling to the earth like lace, and the bells never ring quite right. The cathedral stood as it always had, solemn, towering, untouched by the flames of old wars. But on the first morning of the Queen's mourning, something changed. The statue of the Virgin Mary, 6 feet of marble and grace, seated with the infant Christ in her arms, had begun to bleed. From the eyes. Not painted tears. Not rainwater. Not myth. Blood. Dark. Slow. Coagulating at the jawline. Dripping from her chin onto the stone floor, drop by drop, forming a spiral. The infant in her arms had gone grey overnight. The sculpted face now looked withered, its smile pulled tight like dried skin. The pilgrims screamed. The faithful fled. Some dropped to their knees. Some tore at their own hair, whispering, "She's mourning, she's mourning." But they didn't know who. The Archbishop of Ely was summoned. He entered the chapel in silence. He watched the tears fall. He tasted one. And fell to his knees. He did not weep. But his nose bled. And his skin turned pale as the statue itself. He whispered, "This is not divine sorrow. It is her sorrow. It is the Queen's grief." The clergy tried to veil the statue. The cloth caught fire. No flame. No spark. It simply blackened in their hands, then vanished to ash. A second cloth turned to wax and slithered to the ground. The third screamed. They sealed the chapel. But by then, it was too late. Word spread. Of the weeping Virgin. Of the Queen's mourning. Of sacred statues weeping blood not for God, but for a woman who had opened the ground and buried love inside herself. Pilgrims came anyway. Not to pray. To witness. To shudder. A blind nun touched the tears and began to sing. Not hymns. But a lullaby. In a language lost for centuries. When asked what she saw, she said, "A woman of bone and water. Holding a crown of teeth. And weeping for the thing she cannot unbirth. She died smiling, with blood running from her ears." Isabella was told. She did not react. She walked the length of her garden, slow and silent, and plucked one white rose. The petals fell away before her fingers touched them. She placed the stem in her palm and whispered, "We all weep for something we buried before it was dead." The next day, the statue cracked. Not from age. From pressure, as if something inside had tried to come out. And in the rubble, they found a small black stone in the shape of a spiral. It pulsed once. And stopped. In the Queen's chambers, the mirror fogged from the inside again. This time, a single word appeared. Mother. Chapter 23, The Black Mask. The feast was meant to be a celebration. The Queen's victory. Her son's stability. The nation's peace. They hung velvet from the rafters. Lit torches in spirals. Slaughtered calves and fatted geese. Every noble house sent silver. But no one laughed too loudly. No one drank too deeply. They waited. Because they knew. She had not arrived yet. When Isabella entered the great hall, the candles stuttered. Not extinguished. Just staggered. Like the fire forgot how to breathe for a moment. She wore white. And over her face, a mask carved from onyx. Smooth. Mouthless. Featureless. But the eyes? Hollow and deep, reflecting nothing. No one could see her expression. But all felt her presence. "She's beautiful," one lord whispered. "She's not wearing it to hide," said another. "She's wearing it to reveal." She took no seat. She stood behind her son. He did not look back. But his hand trembled on the goblet. And sweat traced a spiral on his neck. The minstrels began to play. The meat was served. The toasts were raised. And then came the night. Sir Galen of Norwich. Proud. Loud. Unshakably devout. He stood to offer a toast to the Queen. To the lady who broke her chains. And made the throne bleed for her. She inclined her head. He drank. He smiled. And then. He stopped. Choking. Violent. Rasping. Not on food. Not on bone. He clutched at his mouth, gagging, sputtering, hands tearing at his throat. Blood streamed from his nose. Then he coughed. And into his palm fell a single strand of hair. Long. Black. Curled like a question mark. Gasps. Screams. Silence. A maid fainted. The steward backed away. Even the king froze. The knight fell to the floor. Dead. No wound. No reason. Only the hair. A physician examined it. He paled. It is hers, he whispered. The Queen's. I would swear it. And yet. I never saw her pass near him. He tried to burn the hair. It turned to wax. And reformed. Isabella said nothing. She stepped forward, mask still on, and stood over the body. She bent slightly, took the goblet from Sir Galen's stiff hand, and poured the wine onto the floor. The stain spread, and formed a perfect spiral. She looked to the guests. Spoke at last. The body fails before the mind. The mind fails before the spirit. But the spirit belongs to me. She turned. And walked out. The mask never moved. But every guest at the feast heard her laugh. And none could agree whether it came from her lips. Or from behind the mask. That night, the black roses bloomed again. But only in the shape of her profile. The gardeners refused to trim them. One who tried lost all the hair on his body, permanently. The Queen left the mask on her dressing table. But it was gone by morning. In its place, a mirror, cracked in a perfect circle. And behind her reflection, the faint outline of a second mouth. Chapter 24, The Last Confession. They said she no longer slept. That she walked the halls in perfect silence. That her shadow had begun to curl like a serpent's tail. But on the final night of her reign, before the torches were extinguished, before her name was struck from sermons, Isabella sat at her desk, and wrote. Not to God. Not to Edward. Not to her son. To herself. The book was small. Bound in cracked vellum. Hidden beneath the loose stones in the floor of her chamber, a place no one dared step barefoot anymore. The pages were stained with age. One corner bore the imprint of a tooth. And when opened, the ink never dried. She began at the top of a blank page. Let no priest find this. Let no son claim it. This is not repentance. This is remembrance. She wrote of her wedding night. I bled, but not from love. I knew then I would never be held, only handled. She wrote of Gaveston. He took my crown with his eyes. But I gave it away with my silence. She wrote of Mortimer. He touched the shape of my soul and thought it was my skin. He died worshipping a storm that had already passed through me. And she wrote of Edward III. I bore him. But he was never mine. He does not know what name was whispered into his bones while he grew beneath my ribs. She drew a spiral. Tight. Precise. Unbroken. Inside it, she wrote. I do not regret opening the door. I regret nothing. I only regret I cannot watch what crawls through after me. She paused. The candles did not flicker. But the air in the room tightened, as if listening. And she began her final entry. Her hand did not tremble. They called me a queen. But I was a vessel. A bride not to a man, but to a voice beneath the water. A daughter to something that remembers being worshipped in reeds and teeth. My throne was not built of wood. It was made of bone, and silence, and the backs of women who sang to the moon and were buried standing upright. I did not curse England. I returned it to its mother. She lifted her pen, waited, and signed. Isabella, daughter of Melusine. She closed the book, kissed the spine, and placed it in the hollow beneath her feet. Outside, thunder cracked, but there was no storm. And in the garden, the roses withered mid-bloom, their petals turning to parchment. The next morning, she was gone. Her chambers empty. Her scent fading. Her mirror fogged from within. But beneath the stone, the journal remained warm. Chapter 25, The Queen Who Rode with the Dead. They buried her in stone. Not in a cathedral. Not beneath stained glass or bell tower. In a sealed crypt. No name. No date. No cross. Just a spiral carved into the slab above her chest. The tomb remains cold. No matter the season. No matter the sun. Frost forms at its corners in summer. The walls leak moisture that smells of wax and roses. And the servants, those who must pass near it, speak in whispers. They say her eyes were never closed when the coffin was sealed. That her hands twitched in the final hour. That the scent of wet earth filled the room when the final stone was laid. They say she walks at dusk. Not seen, but felt. In the corridors. In the garden. In the crypt. Torches dim. Water ripples in still bowls. And silver tarnishes without warning. More than one chambermaid has collapsed after hearing a voice say, "Don't bow. Dance." Her mirror was shattered. The pieces locked away. But shards continue to appear. On windowsills. In cribs. In priests' beds. Each one fogged. Each one showing, if only for a moment, a woman with black eyes, a crown of wax, and a serpent's tail curled gently around her waist. On the anniversary of Edward's death, the old Roman road stirs again. It begins just after sunset. The guards claim to hear it, first a hush, then a rhythm. Hooves. Hundreds. Galloping. But no riders. The road remains empty. No dust is raised. No prints are left. Just the sound, echoing through the hedges, shaking the bones of anyone listening. And above it all, faint, unmistakable, a voice. Laughing. Some say she rides again. Some say she never stopped. And in the years that followed, a legend bloomed like a bruise beneath the kingdom. There once was a queen who wore silence like a crown. Who married a curse. Who gave birth to fire. And who, when wronged, did not raise an army, but opened the door to the dead. They say she still waits. They say the door is still open. And they say that if you walk the road at dusk with a candle and a name in your mouth, she will ride past you. Not to hurt. Not to help. But to remind you. There are worse things than queens.
The story may end here, but the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries, where every tale lingers and every soul leaves a mark. The Gothic Hour awaits.